So what can you do if you want to be married and you still want to be sure that you don't end up in divorce court? There are a lot of really key conversations that if people were on the same page before the marriage, they'd be a lot less likely to be having conversations in my office or with another divorce lawyer after the marriage. Hello and welcome to Divorce Decoded with Bolton Law. Usually I tell people that we're going to delve into what can go wrong during a divorce and what you can do to make it go right. But I thought we would take another step back today and see what you can do to prevent yourself from needing to get divorced at all. So I have heard a lot of people joke that 100% of divorces begin with marriage and kind of indicate that the best way to avoid getting divorced is to avoid getting married. But I think that there is a lot of data out there that says generally people are much happier married, that they want to raise children together, build a life together. They want to have a partner, somebody who goes through it with them. So what can you do if you want to be married and you still want to be sure that you don't end up in divorce court? I think there are a lot of really key conversations that if people were on the same page before the marriage, they'd be a lot less likely to be having conversations in my office or with another divorce lawyer after the marriage. So the first thing I thought we'd talk about is a prenup. I am not one of those attorneys who's going to tell you that absolutely everybody needs a prenup, but I do think there are a lot of people who would really benefit from it. Not benefit from it so much as if they get divorced, it's great to have on your side, although there's certainly that, but benefit from it just because when two people enter a marriage, it's really nice if you both agree on what that means and what's going to be the effect on the property that you both have or the children that you have. And if you have a really well-drafted prenup, the attorney is going to guide you through having a lot of those discussions. So when do I think a prenup is a great idea? One of the key factors is, are there children from a prior relationship? So if one or both of the partners has children that they've had with somebody else, well, there's kind of an inbred conflict of interest because you never really quit raising your children, no matter how old they are. You always are looking out for them. You always are wanting to provide for them. They are there forever. And it is super important that somebody who is marrying someone that already has children recognizes the role that those children are going to have in the future. And it's equally important that the person with the children marrying someone recognizes and makes a space for the role that their new spouse is going to have so that they can have those two families essentially coming together. So one of the things that I hear talked about a whole lot is how much are the children going to inherit in the event of a death, and how much is the spouse going to inherit in the event of a death. I know most people think of prenups as this is just for divorce. No, it's not. It addresses too what happens in the event that somebody passes away. A lot of people who come into a marriage with a significant amount of assets, they accumulated those assets with the intent of providing for their children and taking care of their children. And it's really important that before they get married, that their new spouse knows exactly how much they plan on providing for them. And equally, I think it's really important that the children recognize the role that the new spouse has. I have been involved in a lot of probates, and I've seen a lot of very frustrated children of the decedent, meaning the person who passed away. And I've also seen a lot of really upset spouses of the decedent because the new spouse may assume that they're going to inherit everything. And the children likewise assume that they're going to inherit everything. So Having a prenup doesn't completely prevent those disagreements, but it does at least mean that the two of you talked about it. And the two of you really sat down and considered, all right, what role are the children going to have? How much do I need to provide for this other person? And ideally, it also means that there's a conversation had with those kids. And I think that is absolutely one of the things that you can do in advance that is going to make it less likely that you end up in divorce court. Because it's not just when you pass away that people want to provide for their children. I will tell you that my kids are all now adults. But like when I married my late husband, he was surprised that I expected to fly them home all the time to visit, because his expectation had been that, well, they're adults, they're kind of on their own, we provide X amount, and then whatever else they do, that's on them. And that was an interesting discussion that he and I had over a period of several years. How much was I going to continue to take care of my adult children as they went to school, and how much expectation did I have from them? So even if you are not having a prenup, if you have children from another relationship, if you have adult children, I think it's super important to get on the same page. If they, for instance, have an argument with their significant other, is the expectation going to be that they move in with you? I think it's very beneficial for people to talk about those things before they get married. So the other really big factor that I think contributes to where a prenup is helpful is talking about what happens to a business. And the reason that I say that is because the value of a business is one of the biggest fights that we can have in a divorce. And by the biggest fights, I mean the most expensive fights, the longest fights. You've got to bring in experts. It's going to make your divorce cost a whole lot. And the other reason is that I realized at some point, I kind of think of my law firm almost as like a sex child that I want to provide for, that I want to take care of. I have a lot of feelings that I want to care for and protect my company. And that is absolutely something that I think two people looking at marriage, if somebody owns a company, is there ever going to be an interest that their new spouse has in that? If not, where does any potential partners, where are employees, where do children come into that? It is super important to talk about that and get on the same page. And that's one of the things a prenup can really help. Maybe it doesn't help you come to an agreement, but it definitely means that you've talked about it. So another important discussion that I would really like people to have before they get married is, what are the roles going to be of the two parents in raising children? Or we should even back up. Do they both want children? This is traditionally one of the biggest reasons that people got married, right? Is to provide a safe area to raise children, to allow somebody to rely on somebody else enough to allow them to be vulnerable to raising children. These days, I know there's a lot of jokes out there about trad wives, and there's some definite hostility between, I think, working moms and stay-at-home moms where they don't understand each other. I think there's even more than that between the men that get married assuming that their wife is going to continue to work. Maybe they came from a household where their mother worked, and it was always an assumption that they had. And the woman would really like to stay home and raise children. And they go into that in completely different areas. And I see a lot of resentment. I hear a lot of resentment, both from husbands and wives that have married people that expected the other thing. And I also see actually husbands being resentful that women don't want to stay home and focus on the family and the children, and women that are resentful that their husband wants them to work or doesn't want them to work. So something to be on the lookout for when you're in love, when you're planning on getting married, you kind of want to make the other person happy. So when you have these conversations, don't just listen to what they say, listen to how they say it. How much do they seem to mean it? How much wiggle room is there? Is that something where they're afraid to say how they feel, but you kind of feel like they know? It's just a really important discussion to have. And ideally, the earlier in the relationship you have this kind of discussion, the better. Now, that being said, I'm going to warn people that a lot of people change their minds. And when I say they change their minds, the one that I see happening the most often is women who have children that always assumed, hey, I'm going to want a career. I'm going to want to work. I'm going to want to do this. Well, then they have that baby and they're looking at, oh my gosh, my child is just on the verge of rolling over, and I'm not going to be the one to see it. Daycare is going to call and tell me that my baby rolled over for the first time. And hey, I think I could be a better mom if I were breastfeeding and making baby food. And hey, I could decorate the nursery, and we could save a lot of money if I stay home and I'm not going to work and these things. And I think that in the United States, I've actually seen statistics where the more possible it is for a woman to not be a primary breadwinner. And by primary, I don't mean that the husband's not a breadwinner. I mean that the couple fully relies every month on the wife contributing a significant income. The more capable a family is of not relying on the mother's income, most women tend to want to spend more time with their kids. Now, that's not all of them, but I think it would surprise men how often it's true. I think it would be a big surprise to a lot of people how often it's true. So I will tell you, myself, absolutely, that was true. I had a law degree, and if it would not have caused friction, if I would have been able to stay home with my children, I probably would not have practiced law for a good 14 years because I really loved being with my children. And I found it challenging and I found it fulfilling. So I love practicing law. I love what I do. But just something to keep in mind. If it's possible not to work, have a real discussion with your fiancé. How would they feel about it? And what do they define as possible? Is it desirable for the mom to stay home as long as you can still live in a great zip code and go to great schools? Or is it desirable for the mom to stay home unless you're being threatened with a foreclosure? Just some conversations to have to make the divorce a lot less likely later on. So that brings me to one of the next big things that we hear about. A lot of people, when they're looking at, well, how can I make it less likely that I'm going to get divorced? There's a big list of things we know, right? You're less likely to get divorced if you wait a little longer to get married. You're less likely to get divorced if you come from similar backgrounds. Now, what kind of similar backgrounds am I talking about? Well, one of the number one things up there is religion. If two parties come from different religious backgrounds, it tends to cause a lot of problems. Now, I'm not saying that if you come from a different religious background than your fiance, that you're never going to be happy and you're never going to make it work. I am 100% aware that there are Catholics that are happily married to Muslims, and there are Mormons that are happily married to Protestants. But statistically, your chances are much better if you come from a similar religious background. Now, if you do come from different religious backgrounds, I would recommend you go to church with each other a few times. You talk about it. How is this going to affect our lives? How will we want to raise the children? What choices are we going to make for them? What choices are we going to allow the children to make? How old are they going to be when they do? Are you going to baptize a newborn baby? Or are you going to not celebrate Christmas or celebrate Christmas? Sit down and really look at all the different ways in which religion affects your life and how do you feel about it. I'm going to tell you one more thing that I think most people don't think of when they're deciding whether or not to marry somebody. And that is, I really want you to listen to what your family and your friends think of the person that you're considering marriage with. Now, I'm not saying that your mom and dad get to pick your spouse, but it is interesting to me how often people come into my office needing a divorce and they say, my family always hated my spouse. My friends could never stand him or her. They always disliked him. And I think you've got to wonder if everybody who really cares about you doesn't think this person is a good fit. Why? And maybe have a real conversation. Hey, how do you feel about this person and why? Is it just a feeling? Are there things that you're seeing? And I will say that you're going to have to be very careful to listen not just to what they say, but to what they mean and what's behind them. I will tell you that as a parent, I am super careful about criticizing who my children go out with, because I think all parents are aware that the quickest way to lose a good relationship with their child is to draw a hard line between them and somebody that they're falling in love with. But if the question is, hey, what do you think of this person in general? There might be some concerns. There might be something that they say. But you don't want to be afterwards in a situation where everybody knew but you. Everybody but you knew that this was a big mistake. Everybody but you knew that this person was trying to change everything about you. Everybody but you knew that this person really disliked a major part of your character. Or if, at the same token, what if the person that you're considering marrying hates everybody that you spend time with? Why is that? That's kind of an indication of a very unhealthy emotional dynamic. I hear that a lot from emotionally abused spouses. And I know that people are super quick to throw around psychological terms. It's something that I complain about a lot, but I definitely have occasion to see marriages in which there's no other word for it. One of the spouses is just incredibly manipulative and controlling and overbearing of the other spouse. And almost always, it begins with, well, they didn't want me to see my friends. They didn't want me to be around my family. I can't tell you how many men and women I've had facing divorce who say, you know, one day I woke up and realized I had no other relationships in my life, that this person had not allowed me to have any other significant attachments. And I felt so alone. So the next thing that I think that you really need to talk about before you get married is finances. And there's a whole world of things that goes in this category, right? Number one, are y'all going to pool finances? Are you going to keep your finances separate? So once upon a time, when I first started doing divorce, which is, 30 years ago, I saw separate finances as a big indication that a marriage might be in trouble. My parents had always had shared finances. I'd had shared finances. I noticed a number of people getting divorced that had very separate finances, and I kind of thought, well, there's kind of a heads up that there was trouble brewing. Well, at this point in my life, I've met a lot more people. I've been involved with a lot more divorces. And I can tell you that there are some very happy marriages out there where people keep separate finances. They tend to have, though, really clear lines about who's paying for what, or how is it going to be determined that they make major purchases in the future? How much are they both going to contribute to the household? In the relationships where I see that the parties have separate finances and yet money has never really been an issue, there's some pretty clear lines drawn where both parties are contributing and both parties are benefiting. And even if they are keeping part of their finances separate, there's a lot of it that they're open about. There's a lot of it that they know, and there's a lot of it that they share. So if your fiance and you want to keep your finances separate, I would encourage you, talk about why. Is that because you're afraid that the other party is going to micromanage everything that you spend? I've seen that. I mean, absolutely, I've seen that. I've seen a situation where, a woman got in trouble because cashing her paycheck, she'd get $10 out to get Cokes at a convenience store. And it's like, well, why didn't you deposit this other $10? Where's this money going to? If you're concerned that that's going to be the situation, maybe that's an indication that your relationship isn't all that healthy to begin with. On the other hand, maybe you both just want a little privacy about your finances. I think most people can be a little embarrassed or private about how much they spend on certain things. So I'm a little embarrassed at how much I spend on my hair. And I've been in a relationship with my boyfriend for 2 years, and I don't tell him how much I spend on my hair. And really, I know it's ridiculous. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't want anybody to know. Now, on the same token, he spends an awful lot of money on sports memorabilia and records and stuff like that. And I think having the idea that, okay, we're both going to have some money that we both get to spend and nobody gets to question us, well, that can be a really healthy dynamic. And I've seen that be a good resolution with a lot of marriages. And I will tell you that situations where the couples have decided we're both going to have a certain amount of discretionary income that we don't have to answer back for. Where couples have had that, I've not seen that finances was a significant part of their divorce. So you might be saying, but they're still getting divorced. Well, remember who I am. I'm a divorce attorney. If you're talking to me in a lot of depth, you're probably going through a divorce. But what that does is I can tell you what the agreements the couples have had where money was not a significant part of what led them to the divorce. Money was not a significant part in them becoming unhappy or falling apart. So if you're going to talk about finances, again, something to keep in mind, how is that going to change over time? So if you have a man and a woman getting married and their finances are somewhat equal, Well, what happens if one of them starts to earn a lot more? Are you still going to keep separate finances? Is that increase going to benefit the family or the couple? Or is that increase just going to benefit that individual person? And that's something that I wish that people would talk about, because that is something that I see cause a lot of arguments. And it's also kind of one of the big red flags that I see that people are preparing for a divorce. And by that, I mean one of the partners realizes that they will soon be in a situation to make a lot more money. And then they're thinking, do I want to have to share it? I kind of want to keep this just to myself. So I think it would be a great idea for couples going into a marriage, if they want to maintain separate finances, at least for a while. We'll talk about, what if one of us starts doing a whole lot better? At what point are we going to revisit this? How much obligation is additional money going to have to benefit the partnership of the marriage or the family as a whole? And what happens if one of you can't work? What happens if one parent decides to be the primary parent taking care of the children? And I've seen this be true with men too, by the way, where the woman's income, for instance, just has a higher potential than the man's. And the parties sit down and they have a very mature talk about it, and they say, you know what, we really feel strongly that one of us needs to focus primarily on the children, and for whatever reason, we think that person should be the man. I think that there are very happy relationships like that. The key is, do they both agree? And I would also say, I think in most cases where that is successful, it's not made entirely based on money, meaning that the parent who's staying home with the children also really likes and wants to do that. And the parent who's primarily going to focus on work really feels confident in the child rearing abilities of the children. So another topic that I'd really like people to talk about before they get married, raising children. Are you for or against corporal punishment? Now, I know almost everybody is going to say they're against corporal punishment, so I don't just mean ask that sentence. I mean, what does corporal punishment mean to you? I have seen people that would get hugely upset if a young child goes to reach for something and the other parent slaps their hand. That's corporal punishment. Well, not everybody would see that. How about, a swat with an open hand on, the back of a kid who's misbehaving? What is corporal punishment to you, and how do you feel about it? It's a great conversation to have in advance. How are you going to punish your kids? Because I hate to be the one to break this to you, but at some point you're going to need to. Your children, no matter how amazing you are not always going to behave. So what are you going to do when they don't? Are you going to do timeouts? Are you going to ground them from their cell phones? Are you going to keep them at home? Are you going to give your kids an allowance? What's going to be your expectations of them in school? Is the only acceptable report card straight A's? Or are you happy as long as the kid is happy? How important are extracurricular activities to you? Do you have an expectation that every evening and every weekend should be spent with children, going to children activities? How much time are you going to have for just the two of you? Do you want to have a couple's weekend away? Is date night something that's going to be a priority for you? Or is that something that is going to seem selfish and time that ought to be spent with the children? Most of these things, there's no right or wrong answer, what there is a need for a discussion, and ideally a need for a discussion as you're developing the relationship before you make that commitment. But if you're sitting in the jewelry store looking at rings and you've never had these discussions, well, better late than never, and better late than after marriage. And better when you're looking at rings than when you're looking at divorce attorneys. So, tips on how to keep your marriage together before it starts as prevented. So, tips on what you can do to keep your marriage together before it even begins, as seen through the eyes of a divorce attorney of 30 years.